Hey everybody, we're back for the final video in this S4 mini glass replacement. Now, I might do something a little bit different in this one. Rather than use adhesive, I might just use some glue to get this display to stick down. Some go-to Loctite, which seems to be pretty useful when it comes to some of these displays. We'll see how this works out for us in the end. Now, partially why I'm doing that is I really wanted to use a different bezel for this particular phone, but it didn't work out that way, and what I was sent was not the correct one. So we're going to go ahead and reuse the old bezel on this particular phone. We're going to go ahead and put our home button, back button, and menu button back on the bottom down here. Normally there's enough adhesive on the back of it that should just fit right back into place. You also want to put your speaker grill on if that has been removed from your bezel. And also you'll want to put your home button back on as well. Now, you need to make sure that you fit this back in correctly into the phone. It can be a little bit tricky to get to stay. Sometimes it's easier to kind of put it onto the glass itself before we re-adhere it down, rather than trying to put it back into the bezel and then putting the glass down on top of it. I might just use a little bit of adhesive to hold it in place. The reason why I'm going to do that rather than putting it onto the bezel and putting the glass on top of it is sometimes it doesn't function as well. It'll kind of stick to one of the edges. And this way, if you get it correctly in its place before you put it on, you won't have that exact same issue. So we'll do that first. Just make sure it doesn't cover over onto any of the sides. You don't want it to stick into the buttonhole at all. Sometimes this clear tape can be a little bit of a pain, especially if you have any residual LOCA glue on it. It can be a little bit difficult to get back into place. It is sticky, it's a little bit more rubberized, and it seems to stick to its backing pretty well, which can make it tricky to get off. Alright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to use this glue. I've used this in a few different replacements, and it seems to work pretty well. The difference between using this and double-sided adhesive is that you'll need to let this cure for a little while to get it to really stick down. So we're just going to use my tool here to put it into the places where I know it's going to need to be adhered. Now, if you're going to do rubberized or double-sided adhesive, you can watch any of the other videos on how to do that I have on the LOCA replacements. It's not very difficult. It's really the same method. Instead of putting glue everywhere, you're going to put tape everywhere. And rather than putting it on the glass, you're going to put it onto the bezel. Actually, you can do it either way. It doesn't necessarily matter. Normally, if I'm using tape, I prefer to put it onto the bezel rather than the actual glass itself. So I'm just going to go around. The reason why I'm doing this with glue instead is this particular phone has a really thin bezel. You've seen this on maybe some of the other phones out there. A lot of I think the S5 has, or the S4, I'm sorry, has a really thin bezel as well. So a lot of people have trouble getting it to stick down on the sides very well. And I'm going to try this method and see if this works out any better for us. The difference with this is if you break this again, you're looking to replace it in the future, this may make it nearly impossible to get this off. But since we've already replaced the display on it, it's not going to matter so much. Just make sure you don't get any glue over into the places you don't want it, like around the button itself, on top of it, for the back and the menu button. So now we have a decent amount of glue on there. We're going to go ahead and insert the ribbon cable first, and then push this down. along the sides and towards the top. Make sure the home button still functions properly once you've got it put on. It feels nice and solid. So now that I have that glued on, I'm going to use some C-clamps and I'd clamp it down. Just clamp down the four corners and maybe along the sides as well. Another thing you can do is put it on top of like a battery. Put a little bit of weight on the back, if you have a bottle of the alcohol you're using, the isopropyl alcohol, will do the trick. Actually, that's what I'll do rather than C-clamp it down and see how that works for me. Let's put that on top and let it cure for about 24 hours. And then come back and check it and see how it worked out for you. Alright, so we've let it cure for 24 hours and it's looking pretty solid on here. I don't see any lips or any options of it trying to come up anywhere. The sides are put down nice and tight. Home button still functions very well. So our next step is to go ahead and reassemble the device. The first thing we're going to go ahead and put back in here is the front-facing camera. Basically just sits in its slot. We have a earpiece speaker and the proximity sensor will go in next. And don't forget the bracket that goes on top of these. If you did bend it upon removal, just make sure you bend it back into shape so the little clamp will fit back in. So we're going to put on the front portion first and then bend it down and to clamp into place. Maybe use your nylon spudger to make sure that this is pushed down and locked in. Next step is the vibration module. Go ahead and put that in. We have our SIM card slot and our SD card slot, so make sure you pull up the little hinge for the ribbon cable connector, slide it in. You can see there's a little white line on it. Try to get as far in as possible and then push that little ribbon cable connector down. Normally it has enough adhesive on it still, stays down pretty well. Put in our grommet for the microphone down here at the bottom. Put in our 3.5mm headphone jack. There's a little bit of a little flap of rubber here that was underneath it, so make sure that's pulled out and fits on top of the bezel rather than underneath it. Go ahead and put in our charge port cable. Make sure the mic fits in first and then press down on the cable. We can put down our home button ribbon cable. We can then take our board and insert it in. Well, we're going to go ahead and clip in the display cable here. Rotate that back and down. Make sure all of the cables are on top of it for the proximity sensor, front-facing camera, 3.5mm headphone jack, and for the charge port cable down at the bottom as well. You may have to push it around a little bit to kind of get it to sit back into place properly. You may have to wiggle it around. Sometimes if you bent the ribbon cable a little bit out of place, it can be a little tricky to get it to sit nice and flat again. It's okay if it wants to pull up a little bit. Once we put the back cover back on, it'll sit back in place properly. Just make sure it's lined up correctly for the screw holes, the volume button as well. Perfect. Now we can take our rear housing. Go ahead and clip this in. Just make sure that this bottom bracket loudspeaker can either be removed or you can put it in place. If you're looking to replace this, it just snaps right out once you've got all the screws removed. I find it easier just to put it back together as one piece, so we'll go ahead and snap it back in. Start with the top portion of this, slide it down on top of the 3.5mm headphone jack at the top, and then go around the sides and just snap everything back in. Make sure the power button, volume button seem to work properly, which they do. Go ahead and put our battery back in. We're just going to go ahead and power the device on here real fast and make sure the buttons still function for us. Alright, so we got screen power on. We're going to go ahead and put the screws in the back portion of this while it finishes a power on cycle. So remember, none of these screws are differing sizes, so just go ahead and put them back in. Just make sure you get all of them back in there. They don't have to be extremely tight, just nice and snug is all you're looking for. You don't want to strip any of the screws out. That little blue portion on them is a little thread locker, so really it will keep them in place even if they're not extremely tight. Just a few more to go. Alright, just one last one in the top corner here. Perfect. Alright. Just check the touchscreen here real fast. It's really hard to test the home button when there's nothing to kind of use with it. But it looks like everything's functioning for us. Go ahead and snap the back on. And that is the glass-only replacement on an S4 Mini. If you found the video helpful, go ahead and hit that like button. I'd appreciate it. If you have any questions, throw them down in the comments. I'll do my best to answer those for you. If you want to see future repair videos for phones and some computer stuff, go ahead and subscribe to me, and I'll try to put out a couple of videos a month. As always, I appreciate you watching, and I will catch you on the next one.